How do we decide what land to protect? Visualizing key biodiversity areas in the continental United States, a study in collaboration with NatureServe by Christy Sandberg and myself, Eric Nutt. In a world as rapidly changing as our own, any land left unprotected is at risk of being lost to deforestation, construction, large-scale agriculture, human encroachment, climate change, etc. Fortunately, there are multiple agencies and organizations working at both the regional and the global level to fast-track conservation efforts. Scientists bring together collective data from a variety of biological and ecological sources to define areas that successfully meet the required conservation criteria. Some of these data sources can include species populations, such as the pronghorn antelope of the central tallgrass prairie. Once abundant in the western half of that ecosystem, now has almost entirely been pushed out to the western United States. Other sources can include vegetative land cover, nesting sites, seasonal feeding patterns, or even the location of historic cultural heritage sites. So what is currently being done? In 2021, U.S. President Joe Biden launched the America the Beautiful initiative with the stated goal of conserving at least 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030. Globally, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, has been working since 2004 on a standard for identifying key biodiversity areas, which are defined as areas essential to supporting the persistence of global biodiversity at either a species or an ecosystem level. Once KBAs are established and the information is shared with stakeholders, that area becomes prioritized for conservation planning. Currently, the standard is set so that a KBA can be identified at a site that compromises 10% of the global extent of an ecosystem defined as vulnerable by the IUCN, or at 5% when the ecosystem is at the higher risk, critically endangered, or endangered level. A concern is that the KBA minimum threshold criteria may interact with ecosystems types that naturally occur with very different spatial patterns, such as those that occur only as highly dispersed small patches or as long, linear features such as in coastal zones. Our team examined 9 different terrestrial ecosystems across the continental United States, presented here. Our goal was to utilize computer coding to produce an automatic workflow that can analyze spatial distributions of any terrestrial ecosystem type and determine where it could meet the KBA threshold criteria. Our toolkit will also help determine if these current thresholds may be set too high, especially for ecosystems with linear or fragmented spatial characteristics. In these instances, it can be difficult to locate independent areas large enough to qualify for conservation using the current standard, or that are in close enough proximity to other areas to allow them to be managed together as a single conservation unit. Our methodology for identifying and visualizing KBAs relies primarily on a software called MarkSan. Simply put, MarkSan is a spatial optimization tool to identify places where habitat representation goals may most efficiently be met. After overlaying a hexagon tile grid, MarkSan uses the area of each ecosystem type occurring within each hexagon tile and iteratively selects groups of hexagons and clusters that could contain sufficient amounts to meet KBA threshold criteria. To visualize this process, we generated a heat map of each ecosystem. Red cells on the map depict areas with very little to no ecosystem present. As we move along the gradient from yellow to green, more and more of that particular ecosystem is present within a single hex cell. This is based on the proportion of ecosystem within that unit relative to the entire ecosystem extent. Green on the map indicates areas where we are very likely to meet the given KBA threshold. Thus, our analysis directs conservation policymakers to the most efficient areas for conservation in order to meet the KBA threshold requirements. While the overall total amount of land protected may be less, the conservation value of the land is greater due to the higher concentration of target ecosystem within that area. While our heat maps provide a good indication for the areas of each ecosystem that meet the threshold to be considered a KBA, we would like to enhance our workflow to generate a clear and precise answer for which areas should be protected. Ultimately, we hope to share this workflow with scientists around the globe so they can identify and protect their own KBAs. We also hope to make the current KBA identification process sensitive to a greater variety of ecosystem types, allowing it to be scaled up globally. KBA identification is one key step in protecting these threatened ecosystems. If these areas are not identified, they are at risk of being destroyed along with all of the biodiversity that they support. Christy and I want to thank everybody for coming out. Projects like ours don't get very far without your support. Thank you.